Good morning, everyone. Good morning. If I could ask everyone to take their seats, please. Thank you. Well, for those of you I haven't had the pleasure to meet, which I don't think is many people in this room today, my name is Erin Herbert, and I am the Director of Programming here at the Muhammad Ali Center. And I just want to start by saying how grateful I am to all of you, to my community, for taking time out of, I know, your hectic weeks to show up today for this really important conversation. I have been asked several times since we announced this program how it came to be. So if you'll indulge me for just a few minutes, I'd like to share my portion of what is actually the culmination of a 10-year partnership and engagement between Mr. Jeff Thompson and the Muhammad Ali Center. In January and February of this year, through the generous support of our partners at UPS, I was able to travel to England to work alongside Mr. Thompson on our first ever Float Like a Butterfly social coach leadership program, which Mr. Thompson will tell you about in detail when he comes to the microphone. Before the training, of course, I had never been to the city of Manchester, so Mr. Thompson took me on a tour of the city. And we started at the city center, and then we explored the historical sites, and we visited the University of Manchester and Salford University. And then he drove me to Media City, which is really, if you haven't been there, a city within a city. It's this new, bright and shining development of technology and media, which is really the new hub of the BBC in England. And then we got in the car, and we drove 10 minutes south, just 10 minutes south, into the neighborhood of Maside. And as we crossed streets and as we drove a little further, I realized I was in a very different city, and we were on a very different type of tour. Now, as we drove corner by corner, block by block, Mr. Thompson was sharing with me the stories of decades of young lives lost in this community. And he wasn't just sharing with me statistics or numbers or the headlines. He was sharing with me names and stories and his relationships and what had and had not happened in these young people's lives to lead them to that moment, the stories of their families, many of whom still lived in the neighborhood. And as we drove, he ended on the story of one young 14-year-old boy whose tragic and untimely and entirely unnecessary death had led to this gentleman's lifetime of work. And in the heart of this neighborhood, in the heart of Maside, was our site of our Float Like a Butterfly training, St. Mary's Primary School. And St. Mary's is this beautiful miracle of an elementary school right in the heart of Maside, where 80 languages are spoken, and the 42 UNICEF rights of the child are unconditional in the school. And through the brilliance of a new principal, they went to the school gate and they started to employ and to train the parents who stood at the gate as para-educators and educators within the school. And through that work, they had transformed it from a failing school to, in 2014, being the primary school of the year winner for the entire country of England. It's incredible. It's an incredible space. And into this space, Mr. Thompson invited our trainees, which were just a cohort of youth workers, workers from community centers and sports programs and after-school enrichment programs, workers who were just simply trying to do better for the underserved and at-risk youth of Maside. And I gotta tell you, when I stepped into that room, I immediately felt at home. Because when I met and I engaged with their community, I recognized my community. I recognized Louisville. I recognized all of you in a group of concerned and sometimes wary and sometimes grieving, yet hopeful citizens who weren't forced to be in that room, who weren't made to be in that room, but who chose to be in that room because they still believed that they could make a difference. And even more extraordinary to me, they chose to be at that training, they chose to be in that room because they understood Muhammad Ali. They understood Muhammad Ali. And they believed that his legacy, his principles, his life could make a difference in the lives of their young people. It was a powerful and impactful an important outcome-driven program that we intend to replicate, which we will actually replicate this afternoon here at the center with a cohort of our Louisville-based educators. And I would love to tell you that that is the reason that we are here today, that that's the entire reason that we're here today, but it's really only part of the story, because on May 22nd of this year, I was sitting in a room at my home. I think I was reading a book, and my husband was in the other room, and he said, "Turn on the television." And I think I then, like many of you, watched in horror as the atrocities at the Manchester Arena unfolded at the Ariana Grande concert. And in the days that followed, as they announced who the bomber was, and the cameras flooded to the front of his home, and they showed the building, I went, I know that place. Because he lived in Maside, and the street that he lived on was just a little over 1 mile from St. Mary's Primary School. Yeah, he was their neighbor, their friend, their community member, their schoolmate, their student, their son, and he was just 22 years old. So today, I know that my colleague and my friend, Jeff Thompson, comes to you with a heavy heart, a heart burdened by the lives of many young people lost, by young people who have chosen to take lives. But I also know that with a fortitude that I can only someday hope to share. He continually asks himself one question: what would Muhammad Ali do? What would he say? And I think as Louisvillians, we all know the answer. Muhammad would say, get back in that ring and keep fighting. Keep fighting, keep fighting. And he wouldn't just say it to Jeff, and he wouldn't just say it to me, he would say it to each and every one of us, because I can assure you, in all of the wonderful communities we've had a chance to visit and bring Muhammad's legacy, there are groups of citizens from Detroit to Houston to Memphis to Nashville, from Kazakhstan to Manchester, who, like you, are still willing to fight, are still willing to hope. And they need our help, and we need to help each other. So I will end where I began, by saying how grateful I am for all of you for being here today, for being in this conversation today, because you being in this room, you sharing this space with us, gives me the hope to keep on going. And I guess I'll end by how Muhammad put it, by saying, many things could be accomplished if we only believed.